Nate is the co-founder and CEO of 10Speed, a content marketing and SEO agency for SaaS companies. And prior to starting 10Speed in 2020, Nate spent 9 years at Sprout Social, building and scaling the inbound engine to over 100 million ARR. He's consulted with companies like Help Scout, Xylo, Hologram, and Popular Pays. Nate, the floor is yours. You want to go ahead and share your screen?
Awesome. Thanks for those of you who are on right now live and for anyone tuning in to recording down the line. So yeah, I'm excited to jump in. Let me just hide my own camera here so I have to look at that. And yeah, we'd love to jump in. I have a little intro here. I'm going to kind of cover what we're going to cover today. This is a topic that I love talking about and sort of have been living and breathing for quite a while. But at the high level, what we're going to kind of cover today is a quick overview of the content lifecycle and where content decay fits into that. The reasons why content decay happens, why content decay matters, how to identify it, ways to fix it, and then I have kind of a detailed walkthrough, kind of just showing that example. And then really the key thing that if you're kind of in and out, I want to make sure implore you to tune into the last part, which is really the systems and process around it. That's where I'm going to have the kind of leading into that is the weight of all the experience that I've had and the things that I've learned of how you actually can do this continuously and at scale to make sure that you are taking full advantage of the growth that can come from addressing it. So I don't need to spend a whole lot of time on the about me since Travis just gave a nice intro, but as he said, I was first marketer at Sprout Social and was there for over 8 years, helped scale to 100 million, which is a great experience. And the context here is, content marketing SEO was a huge part of that, scaling the blog to 1 million visits a month, and really being organic, being the #1 revenue channel for the company was a massive learning from there. And then, as he said, I've been consulting with other companies, and then started the agency in 2020 and have had the privilege of working with a lot of great companies so far. So excited about that. And then also the host of a podcast where we explore kind of the different ways that content grows companies. So have some social stuff there. Would love to connect if you're interested. So jumping in, wanted to kind of just define it, I guess, so we're all clear for anyone who isn't as familiar with the term. Content decay is essentially an ongoing decline in organic performance rankings for one or more blog posts or just really sort of any kind of content. And the term decay is important because it's not necessarily like a sharp drop outside of like an indexation issue or something. It really is something that's going to be sort of a slow decline over time, and it really can cause it to go unnoticed if you don't have the proper systems in there to identify it. So this is a quick sketch I made on my iPad one night, and it kind of went into a post we did about content decay, just to kind of help visualize. So the interesting thing here is that you really can be talking about a single post, like in from a timeline standpoint, that could be sort of a life cycle of a post, over 9 to 12 months, or it also could just be an entire program over 9 to 12 quarters or whatever. So it's similar and interesting that the pattern here can kind of follow that for both a single post as well as an entire content program. So really quick to kind of just define those, early traction. We know that new content takes time to build up, kind of get that the traction and ramp up over time. Like rarely do you post something new and it just jumps up. So a little bit of a building time for search engines to figure out what's going on and how you want to handle that. Growth, is really do start to pick that up, gaining backlinks, more rankings, matching to more queries, really see that growth that you're going for. And then the peak stage, is very dynamic. For some, it could be there for just days or weeks before it starts to move into decay if it's a bit more competitive, or it could just sort of plateau. And there's a number of causes for what, can actually kind of cause that peak to end the growth. And then lastly, decay, where we'll kind of spend the time today, is just when your content's less relevant, less competitive, it can kind of move out of that and start to decay. So some examples, really show like some real data behind this. This is a client that we worked with that had slow, long decay over a long period of time. We started working with them in spring of 2021 and had a lot of work to do to update it. But because there was so much to do, there was a lot of opportunity to kind of get that quick growth back up into the right. So another thing, and we'll kind of talk about consolidation a little bit later, is, from the decay, finding a way to consolidate and really see some growth. Similarly, after a period of decay, making some improvements in that and really seeing other results start to grow again. And then lastly, one of the bigger ones is just a lot of content that was not well organized and not well optimized. Did require a pretty big consolidation project, but you can see really unlocked a lot of the growth that they had been desiring. So really cool stuff that comes out of it when you figure out how to unlock it. So let's jump into a little bit more of what happens there. So you're probably familiar with some of these. I don't want to spend a ton of time here, but we know that search engines prioritize fresh content. Unless you're looking up something historical, you're rarely going to find results in the first few pages that are less than a year to maybe 3 old. You're not going to find stuff from 2012 very often. So we know it's there, but it's not just about the published date. It's the relevancy of the content, the cited sources, everything that goes into that. So really old content can be victim of decay. Internal competition is another one. Just having multiple URLs and a lot of content on the same topic, not providing a signal that's clear on what is the actual priority, and potentially some mixed intent in one URL. So that could be another thing that starts to cause that decay over time when you get too much overlap internally. The one that I think a lot of people probably think of when their rankings and traffic starts to go down is just someone is beating me in the SERPs. And so here in this example, you can see the folks here have very high domain authority. So some of the longer tail, you may have been benefiting from that because you were there first. Larger site comes in, creates content on the same topic. They just have a higher domain authority, so they outrank you. Or someone else, maybe they don't have a higher authority, but they just create a better, more comprehensive piece, or it may be more aligned to search intent. The search intent shift can also happen. An example I like to use is electric cars. If you searched that 20 years ago, you would not have seen more of like a retail shopping MSRP part of the search engine, because that just wasn't a thing. It would have been early days of what we were doing with electric cars, like educational, informational type of results. And so that's a kind of a stark example over a longer period of time, but it is something that happens. That the search engines are constantly trying to figure out what's the intent and what's the best way to present this. So that is something to kind of keep an eye on, is that if intent is shifting or if you have mixed intent SERPs, that can also cause decay to some of the existing content you have. And then lastly, sort of the topical depth, topical authority is also important. There's been a lot of growth and development, since roughly that 2018 period. So any companies that have some of that older content that is really susceptible to have not really understood the intent as well and being able to go fully cover the topic. So in general, just a very positive thing for both search engines and the user to be able to understand that when they come through and read this, that it is fully covering the topic and giving them everything that they are looking for. So I want to spend a little bit of time on why it matters. There's some higher level stuff. So obviously, like, your goal is to grow the traffic and results in a lot of different ways. And so when you constantly have this decay happening under the surface, and working kind of against the gains you're getting from new content, you miss out on some of that compounding growth or as high of a growth rate. Naturally, as you're losing rankings on keywords or not matching as well, you just have less visibility. And then as well, when the rankings are dropping, you're getting less of that click-through, not getting as much traffic, and then therefore fewer people coming to your site, less awareness, less traffic. It's harder to get the real reason you're doing this is to get business outcomes. And when you're missing out on those, you have less opportunities to grow the business. And then generally, I think an area that not as many people talk about is the content decay can affect your ability to retain backlinks. And so as your content gets older and less relevant, anyone who had linked to you prior, if they're trying to stay on top and keep their content relevant, are going to look at your source and say, this is no longer a good place to link to, and they may link elsewhere, and you sort of lose some of the backlinks, which just accelerates the downward spiral then, and actually makes it harder to get some of those wins from updating the content. So this is a content decay forecasting tool that we built that I want, first of all, you'll have access to it at the end of the deck, and we'll send it out as well. But I wanted to kind of walk through some of the examples here. So there's instructions in there to kind of like, if you want to calculate your own rate of decay per month and rate of new traffic growth per month, that's all in there and how to do that. But just wanted to walk through some examples. So if you're creating, 5,000 new visitors per month from the new content you're creating, that's really solid. But in this example, if you had a higher rate of decay from a lot of existing content, you can see that even though the green line, the new traffic is growing nicely, the net total struggles, and over a 24-month period actually declines. So and then this is two different paths to doubling, from 100,000, so getting to 200,000. In this example, a lower rate of decay, still not zero, but a lower rate, and then about 8,000 in terms of new traffic per month, around 8,000. So that gets you there. And then the hard path in this example, a higher rate of decay requires almost 3 times as much new traffic. So again, you're kind of looking at this like, you can see why that makes such a big difference, that if you think about everything that have to go into that getting that much new traffic every single month is a substantial investment, substantial amount of time. It's a big operation, when really just having that focus here and understanding how to tackle the decay and stay on top of it can really get you the same result without having to do nearly as much on the new side. And then lastly, in this example, kind of staying with the same top line of 100K, if you think about like 10% decay, if that feels like, 10%, that's not bad, it could be a lot worse. I want to just kind of show like what the real impact is. So if we look at the table view from that same data and what kind of feeds into the chart, the alarming thing is that if you look at over a 24-month period, you basically have a net gain that's 10% of what you created. So you're actually losing 90%. So you spend all that work to get, over 300,000 new visits in traffic, only to net out, about 38,000. So kind of helps speak to like not just that you aren't getting the compounding growth, but really that you're like swimming upstream and working against yourself just to try to get the same results, because you're not addressing decay in the way that you need to. So this part, I just want to kind of talk through first some of the tools and like how you can do it. So there's a number of ways you can identify decay, and then later, we'll kind of talk about like how often and some of the systems around that. But a few different tools, we'll move quickly. This should be pretty straightforward. I think Google Analytics is possible. Obviously, you don't have the detail on organic as much, but you can see all channels, and it's pretty easy to tie to conversion impact. So just seeing that traffic's going down, conversion is going down, pretty straightforward. Search Console, I think, is probably one of the most common, but really taking advantage of the detail on the keywords and the queries that are matching to the pages and losses there, I think is highly insightful, but also can see technical, core web vitals, backlinks, all of that. Third-party tools, it certainly helps to be able to do stuff for other companies where you don't have access, but can also be helpful at times just as a different place, or maybe a starting place before you get into Search Console, just to be able to see, I think, a nice condensed view of a number of stats kind of all right next to each other. And I also want to call out, Travis gave me permission to highlight a beta feature that ClearScope has right now, and we've been playing with it a little bit and pretty excited, but fits very perfectly into what we're talking about, is like an option of how you're kind of staying on top of or monitoring or digging into content decay. And so in this, you're able to add the pages. And I think a couple of things that are intriguing here is that you can see some of the content grades at a glance and how they're changing, as well as like the trend of clicks in that post. So I think those are both really valuable to kind of see. And even in the example here, you can kind of see what's going up, what's trending down. Some of that I think is very helpful. So And then lastly, with this one, if you're already using ClearScope, as we are, then like that's a very logical place that's just integrated in your workflow, kind of working inside the same system and accomplishing multiple things. So with that, like an example here in terms of like, where would I even start if that's kind of your question? One place would just be a Search Console. An easy way would be just pulling data that compares the last 6 months to previous 6 months, filter in, to like blog or whatever kind of subfolder or section of your site that has your content, and then export that data. And then it's pretty easy to then organize that data by clicks and by impressions. And then we always do is just make an additional column for each one that shows the difference in clicks and the difference in impressions, so that we can kind of see what gained and what declined in that time period. And then really just sorting those from highest to lowest. So starting with impressions and looking at like, where have we lost the most impressions? Did we also lose clicks? And then repeating that process of where we lost clicks, did we also lose impressions? Just to kind of get a shorter list of like where I would maybe want to focus for where there's been some of the greatest changes there. And then, a few things that really can kind of show you where you would start is like, if you have a loss of a lot of impressions, but clicks are kind of steady, and that probably means that you've had a number of queries that stopped matching to that post, potentially because the content that's there wasn't quite relevant, but you can identify which of those queries there were and create new content that's more focused on that topic. If you lost a lot of clicks, but not as many impressions, then there could be just a little bit of like that ranking CTR intent issue you want to dig into. And then obviously ones that lose a lot of impressions and a lot of clicks, you want to dig in and understand what's going on there and figure out how to fix it, which we'll go over in a minute. So ways to fix decay. So there's kind of 6 ways that I've bucketed, and I really want to kind of, again, move a little bit quickly. There's a decent amount of text on these slides, so that if you want to recap later and look through it, there's a little bit more detail there as well. First of all, when you come across some of these that have lost a lot of traffic, there are times when you'll see it and say, that's fine, I don't care about that piece of content because it's not relevant anymore, or we've moved in a different direction. Totally fine. And that's a good way to keep your site clean and stay healthy. It's just to be pruning some of that content that you're finding along the way. So not as much that you would gain traffic back, but just fine to kind of eliminate it and not have to keep having that come up in your analysis. Expanding, I think, is quite common in an area where, again, you don't have that topical depth, or some of these pieces are missing a little bit of what's needed. I need a little bit more detail, need to just round out some stuff that's desired in that. And, it could be a few extra 100 words or maybe even 1,000, 2,000. So expanding, I think, is quite common and something we do quite a bit. There's a lot of good stuff there. It just needs a little bit more. And the updates, I think, are a bigger one. And probably, one of the things that people talk about the most is like content refreshes, content updates. And this, I think, is kind of across the board. You can have some lightweight stuff that's updating headers and, restructuring a little bit, or in some cases, just a full rewrite, full like fresh take on the topic, basically, and a full update. So that's then moving into consolidation, which I think is really important. Again, when you have a lot of that internal competition, you have a number of posts that are kind of touching on some things, really just being able to pull that all together, give a clear signal to both search engines and visitors, like, this is the piece, this has everything you want, and brings a lot of opportunity there. Creating new, as I said earlier, you may find some things that are like, wow, we kind of matched for these queries, or we were matching for these queries. And then we look at, the content on that post and realize there's only a couple sentences. And that's why you weren't ranking well. And it's a clear opportunity that you could go do some research and create a full new piece on that. And that's actually something we did a lot over the years at Sprout Social, and helped drive a ton of growth for us in that respect. And then lastly, again, kind of overlooked, but like, there will be cases where you have great content, it's in depth, it's up to date, it's aligned with search intent. It just needs some backlinks compared to some of the competitors. Or in some cases, you're just missing a lot of opportunities to build more internal links from your own content to give more signals to that and priority to that content. So a lot of different ways you can approach it, and every situation and every point of decay is a bit different. So Again, more there. And then I wanted to kind of walk through now. Let's do a quick time check, so we're good. So this is really an approach of like, how would we go about this kind of from beginning to end? So take an example from Zapier, who has a ton of content on their site. So just dropping that into a third-party tool because we don't have access to their search console or anything like that. And just basically saying, hey, if we were to look here and find an opportunity, go through the process that we've just talked about of identifying it and then figuring out the way to fix it, how can we do that? So I will kind of move a little bit quickly because this, you probably could do a full session just on this walkthrough in greater detail, but I want to make sure that we have time to get to the systems and processes and stuff that's really going to be where you can implement a lot of that. So starting out, pretty obvious. In this case, we'll use Ahrefs for this, but any tools would work. So dropping in the domain and going to top pages. And so here we just kind of look and we want to sort and maybe sort by a few different things, but what we're looking at here is just sort of a traffic change over time over a 6-month period. And so we can see this post down below about creating PDF has lost 5,000 monthly visits compared to 6 months prior. And then similarly in the box above has also lost a substantial amount of traffic value. So it's a good one. It jumps out. There's a lot of interest there, and one that we can kind of check out and see what we might want to do with that. So first step would just be actually go make sure that URL is still on the site. It's there. Make sure it hasn't recently been updated, in which case we can see a date from early 2021. So then dropping back into the tool, put the URL for the specific post into there, and really kind of look at like, okay, where's backlinks, referring domains makes sense. And then click into the actual organic keywords, which is 3,700 for this post. And then here we want to just spend a little bit of time kind of looking here. So you can see the ones with the red bar next to them up top are the highest volume, and they also are kind of all in like 8 to 11. So end of first page, beginning of second page. And so it can make some assumptions that maybe that's where some of the bigger drops happened, but then also can kind of see some that are here in the like 4 or 5 are a bit longer tail, and maybe matching a bit better. So obviously, if we had access, this is where you would want to validate in Search Console, like, yes, this is actually where the loss came from, is from some of these higher volume ones that are at the end of the first page. But in this case, we'll kind of just assume that we have validated and we're going to move forward. And then really from here, it's kind of that question of, do the ones that are ranking better and the ones that we may have lost, are they similar enough that we need to update this and expand it? Or are they different enough that it warrants kind of splitting out and creating something new? And so, one quick check is, the create PDF query on the left example is one of the high volume ones, and how to create PDF on the right is an example of one that's ranking 4. So you do this for a number of queries, but really just kind of a quick glance of like, are they relatively the similar results, or the SERPs quite a bit different, is what we're kind of trying to understand. In this case, they're very similar. The how to create a PDF one does include video. So if we have some sort of video asset to be able to put into that post, that's a good idea to embed that there. And then also, if you don't, could be an opportunity to suggest creating one as a way to enhance that. And then similarly, I know this is a kind of a tough visual, but like the create PDF side, the thing we're looking at here is that there's kind of a mix of tools that are coming up and also how to. So again, there's a bit of a mixed intent SERP here, but quite a bit. So generally, what we're trying to do then is say, like, I think we can, based on this, I think, some could take a different approach and say we want to split the separate ones, but with enough of the SERPs looking similar, we think there's a way to optimize this, expand on it to really be able to say, hey, there's a way to cover how to create a PDF and cover kind of both of the instructional and the tools side of it. And then again, like, if you really wanted to go after it, you had developer resources, it could be interesting. I don't know how much development time would be required, but to actually create a tool to be embedded on this page as well. So next, we want to kind of just go and look at the competitors and analyze like everything that's going on, and actually click into all the results in some of those SERPs to kind of see how does this post stack up. So obviously you want to use ClearScope for a number of the queries here to kind of see that. from the natural language standpoint and some of the competition. But they also want to go and look like the visual weighting, the priority sections of some of these posts, what's happening here. And so we can get, this is just sort of a collection of some of those posts in the top spots and understand what's happening here. And so that can kind of give us some direction too on how we want to structure the post and where to prioritize. And then we also want to look at the featured snippets and the PAA section to gain even more context on kind of what we're interpreting as intent. So at this point, we understand that we've identified a post with material loss. We've looked at the queries that seem like they have the most potential to gain. We've analyzed the intent behind those queries. We've determined a path forward to refresh and expand the content. Studied the clear scope reports and manually reviewed competing sites. Mapped out some of the headers and studied the featured snippets in PAA. So all that's gone into this. And so next, I'm not going to walk through a bunch of screenshots here, but we're going to update the content. We're going to, update the H1 to fit kind of the new direction and the new angle of this. We want to expand the number of H2s to really kind of cover all of the ways to create a PDF. We want to build out inside of those, more examples of tools that people can use. We want to make sure we format and structure some of the more informational stuff correctly to be able to compete for the featured snippet. We're going to actually write the new content and adjust all of the formatting and layout of the post and update title tag and meta description. So there's a lot there, and I'm sort of breezing over, a good chunk of work, especially on the writing side. But then lastly, we kind of jump in and see like, what does this have for internal links? And what do we have? And so we could do that in this tool. You could also do it in Search Console. We can see there's basically 2 meaningful internal links. So an easy way to just do a site search, including your blog structure and the PDF term, and really kind of just try to quickly highlight what's indexed that has some similar content and look for ways that you might be able to build some internal links to this post that we're going to update. And so then lastly, kind of where we're at is we want to make sure that as we're doing all this update work, we build internal links to it to give it the most paths into that and the most signals for search engines. We also want to make sure we update the publish date. So that's, again, for search engines and for people landing there to know that you've spent time in updating that recently. Definitely want to put a good amount of distribution behind this. You've spent time updating it. It's still highly relevant. It's not repetitive to people just because you had written about it before. So please distribute as much as possible. And then with anything, bigger changes, you certainly want to monitor performances and understand kind of what's happening. Did we get it right? Do we make a few little tweaks once we see some of the data coming in? Because you don't always get it right on the first shot. So that would be the last piece there. Cool. So now I want to get into this, like the systems and processes. We've kind of gone through, quite a bit of the elements of Decay, and the important part here is to understand how to turn this into something that you're going to be able to address regularly, know how to do it, build it as part of your entire content program, and something that feels just as much a part of it as anything else, and not this like thing off to the side that's like a nagging task that you have to do. So one of the context I want to provide before jumping in, this is a post at Sprout Social that was conceived and created by my now co-founder at 10Speed, Kevin King. And so this was an area that identified a ton of different image size queries and really saw an opportunity to build sort of in a consolidation standpoint, even though we didn't have a lot of content, just a massive resource that would be easy to use, a big asset for social media managers as social networks are constantly changing that. So this ended up being a highly trafficked post. So this is some Ahrefs data on it, but one of the big learnings, this particular piece was called always up to date. And so by nature, we had to update it. But outside of that, we would have anyway, because it had such substantial amounts of traffic that we really kind of had to update it about quarterly. Otherwise, we were losing, anywhere from like 75,000 visits per month if we would have let it decay. So you think about that on a quarterly basis, losing that much monthly traffic and how much you would have to create new to offset that. And you can even see in this chart, even past the time when I've left Sprout, that there's some big swings up and some decay, and then some work and some big swings up again. So that is one example of many of the things we did, and a lot of the learnings that I've had from the time of scaling Sprout, even some of the consulting work I did, and then very much a part of a process that we have for our clients to be continuously addressing content decay. So that's where kind of all these learnings are coming to place. But the reason that teams struggle with this and kind of everything we've gone through is that I think there's a lot of it, like talk about, being too much focus on new content. You're sort of on that new content treadmill or hamster wheel or whatever you want to call it. And I think that's true. But I think the bigger challenges are it keeps happening. So like in that example I just gave from Sprout, like that's just, it can feel frustrating to have something that is such a big part of your traffic and your lead generation and revenue that just keeps having to have focus on it. But really thinking about that over dozens or hundreds of posts can be kind of overwhelming. So it's tough for teams because it keeps happening, on a monthly, quarterly, semi-annual basis. The process is time consuming. I went very quickly through all of that, over the last 20, 25 minutes. But even that, you can just see that's, one post. So like there's a good amount of work that goes into it. And even if you do have in-house expertise, again, the in-house folks who understand how to do this have a lot of other stuff. If they're in-house SEO, they're probably dealing with technical and on-site and just all kinds of stuff that they don't necessarily have the time to fully focus on what this takes. So it's really tough. So this framework we came up with is really focused on decay and kind of the operations around addressing it. So the apps framework, analysis, planning, production, and standardization. So one of the things is, like, at the very minimum, set a predetermined cadence for analyzing decay. It can be the first of the month, first of the quarter, whatever it is for you. Pick a time, put it on the calendar, just make it a regular thing that you're going to commit to doing that. If you're not, that's where you start to have the decay that you aren't seeing happen, but it's happening under the surface. So this is kind of step one, just make sure you're looking at it on a regular basis. Always recommend that you have some sort of scale, create it to whatever makes sense for you. Example would be, if you mark it as a 1, it's like, hey, we need to update this. There's issues. We got to do it. 2, I'm going to investigate this further. 3 would be defer. Like the next time, whatever your cadence is that you come back to check, you start with your 3s and see if it is actually, gone down further, or if it was fine, and then 4 will be no issue. And the other aspect in kind of how you create your scale is to understand that fluctuation is normal. Content decay, it's not always decaying if it's going down, because rankings fluctuate, traffic fluctuates. So recommend kind of figuring out how to calculate your standard deviation benchmark for some of your traffic. And if you have some posts that are really, really big, maybe calculate specifically for that. But use some sort of, like, if it's greater than 1 standard deviation as part of the math in your scale that you create. And then lastly, in terms of analysis, I recommend having a way to flag frequency. So again, as the example I gave on that post from Sprout, we flagged that one like this is quarterly, and eventually it became monthly because it was so competitive. But we didn't have to go looking for it every time and like duplicate that analysis work. We just knew over time, like, hey, this one's quarterly or this one's monthly. We got to just throw that in a column in a spreadsheet, and now we know. So as you get going and make it more and more of your process, highly recommend that becomes just a data point that you have in the spreadsheet or somewhere that you can kind of reference that first without having to do the analysis work. Next, content planning cannot be in a silo. You can't have content decay be this like other thing that gets addressed once in a while, but content planning is here. It has to be something that's integrated into the topic roadmaps you're doing. I also would recommend, as we said, like, you kind of figure out what are some of the posts that need to be updated more frequently because they decay faster, it's more competitive. I recommend that your content planning meeting is that it matches the frequency of your most updated cadence for content. So if you have a post that needs to be updated monthly, but you plan your content calendar quarterly, that becomes very challenging to figure out. You start to have issues where it's competing, you have to bump stuff down, it just gets a little more clunky. Whereas if you're most aggressively decaying stuff is semi-annual, then you have a lot more flexibility in when you plan. But if you have some aggressive stuff, I would recommend making sure you match your planning cadence to that. Also, if you have a fixed capacity each month, you got to kind of determine what's the ratio that you want to approach. So at Sprout, it changed over time, but I think we had 14 new 6 updates per month, and then we were trying to prune 10 to 20 posts per month as well. And so that helps as you go into planning. As you're doing your research, you kind of understand roughly the ratio you're at. The example I gave earlier where we had that client with like a steep decline and then we built it back up, we did nothing but fixing decay and working on existing content for I think 6 months before we really even got into new content. And then over time, that ratio can shift depending on what you need. So it's flexible, but it really just helps to make sure you have that instead of building an entire content calendar of new content and then fighting to try to get content updates done. And then lastly, and I'll go into more detail on this in a couple slides, but highly recommend that you insist that content decay research is done ahead of planning meetings. So you can't come in and just say, hey, this one's dropped, whatever X%, or this many, we've lost so many clicks, I want to put this on the roadmap, without having done the process of understanding what's actually going on and what needs to be done to fix it. So that work has to be done before planning. And I've lived some of the pain to say that that's an important one. On the production side, recommend having a different content brief template for updating existing content. So we do this at 10 Speed, we do this at Sprout. Like, there's just differences here in the instructions you have to give writers, like in what you're keeping, modifying, deleting, rearranging. There's just some differences there. So recommend having a different content brief template. You also want to work with writers who understand how to do content updates. It's not like it's overly complex, but it does, again, if you're taking some of these different directions, it's just different. If you've ever had to come into a piece and try to like rearrange it and work it, it's just different than starting from scratch. So having writers that understand how to do that work is helpful. And also just whatever terms you have, if it's contractor or agency, or whatever, make sure it's favorable to be able to do smaller updates and that you don't have to pay sort of that full new content rate every time they work on something. I think is also important. You should ideally have some sort of publishing checklist. For some of you, it may just live in your head. But when you're publishing a new post, you have sort of a checklist of things you do. I recommend having a unique one for when you're publishing any sort of content update or consolidation, just because there's a number of things that you have to do to make sure there's potentially 301 redirects, any changes made, updating the publish date, all that stuff. I want to make sure you're accounting for that. And lastly, you also probably have some sort of process of how you get images for posts, unless you're doing it all yourself. Even then, you kind of have a process. Make sure you have also are accounting for how you get new or different images for this. So you don't want to have everything ready to be updated, but it's outside of your creative team's workflow, and all of a sudden you don't have the images you need, and you're kind of held up from publishing it. And lastly, in the standardization, this one is very closely tied to the planning portion of it. And I highly recommend that you, over time, develop a menu of kind of predetermined ways to handle decay. So you could say this is a small one, medium, large update, consolidation is its own beast, whatever it might be. I don't remember what terms we used. We eventually developed this over time at Sprout, and it was substantially helpful. And so like, you could kind of get an idea of like, okay, a small update is we're going to change, these 3 or 4 things, and then understand those, and your team may have a rough idea of how long those things take. If not, I recommend just tracking time for a short period just to get an idea, and then you kind of build those. And the reason this is so important is that it gets folded into your planning process because, and this is why you have to have that research done ahead of time to know what is needed. So when you come in, say you're doing 10 posts per month, so you're coming in to plan for 10. If you've already done the research and you say, hey, look, these just need some small updates. There's 2 of them. I'm going to do that. And you'll know, hey, this amount of time for 2 small updates is equal to 1 new post, or, 1 full slot of the 10. and you can plan accordingly. And then on the flip side, the consolidation project could be pretty big, and that could require 2 of those slots in that month. So it's just really important that you have that level of research done ahead of time. So when you go into planning, you come in with conviction and say, I've done the research, this needs to be consolidated. I need to dedicate 2 slots to this so we can get it done. And this just helps your team to not be overcommitting to stuff or stretched, or you're constantly bumping stuff to the next month. Just really kind of makes everything flow a much smoother and make sure you're getting to the things that you need to get to. And then lastly, the same can just be true for design and development resources. So as you start to understand for each of these updates, what may or may not be needed from different teams, sort of standardize that, make sure you have some process for lead times and what you're requesting and all of that. So that's kind of the gist there. So just to kind of wrap up, and then we'll get into Q&A. I think kind of what we went over and what is helpful across the entire topic of content decay is just knowing how and why it happens, understanding how decay affects your growth rate, being able to utilize the various ways to fix it, taking the time to create the systems and processes that are going to support the work that's needed to keep growing and doing this on an ongoing basis. And then my parting words would be, just embrace the opportunity. As I said before, it can feel like this nagging thing that's like frustrating, and you want to work on the new stuff that's fun, but you got to fix this old stuff. And honestly, it is a huge opportunity. I don't know how competitive the folks in your space will be, but I'm certain that if you are focusing on it, it will be a differentiator, at least for some of your competitors. And the really fun thing in some of those charts that we saw is that when it's been performing in the past and you're able to update it or fix it or consolidate, you get those gains typically much faster, even within 2 to 5 days. So again, content lifecycle, we talked about like the early traction and the growth, and that takes time. When you do the updates, they really can pop, and sometimes pop quite a bit. And that's exciting, and it's fun, and it helps you get some of that growth back pretty quickly. So I just highly recommend that you embrace the opportunity. So I have these resources here. There's a number of things that we've covered on this. They'll have that, and I think Travis is going to send some links out in the email as well. But yeah, with that, we can jump into some Q&A.
Fantastic. Yeah, great job. Very thorough and actionable as well. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions. One from Jamie: what tool are you using on the external competition slide to see the DA and other metrics? Like you use it on a couple of your SERPs.
Yeah, that was to the Ahrefs Chrome extension. It just automatically drops that into there. Yep.
Cool. And then we got another question from Anonymous. In your experience, is there an average amount of time that content tends to go through the content lifecycle?
No.
What they're kind of asking is like from beginning to like decay, like how long should they put on their calendar to kind of review?
Yeah. No, an average, no. I mean, there's certainly posts that you could get to a good place and it'll kind of stay pretty steady for a really long time. But then others that are up and down in that full cycle in a month. So I wouldn't want to put an average on that, but I do think as you go into that and start to learn that in your own content, that's where you start to see the average amount of time. This post is quarterly, like it's every 4 months or whatever, like you start to see the average on some of your best performing content. But I wouldn't put a blanket average on all of it.
Gotcha. And then a question from Elizabeth: do you need to say last updated or just change the date and erase the original date?
That's a good question. I think either one works well. Sometimes the last updated is like a workaround because of how the CMS works or what's available, like the front end design of the blog, and someone's kind of working around that. Other times I think that it can show this is something we've been working on for a long time. Like, hey, we originally did this in 2014. This was last updated 3 weeks ago. Like, we're actively on this. This is like a living breathing piece of content for us. So I think this can show that. But even that Sprout example, I mean, that's a 7-8-year-old piece of content that just shows that it was the published date shown in the blog design is the most recent update. So
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice. And then a question from Anonymous. Do you have things you look at to understand if something has decayed versus the topic is no longer as popular?
That's a good question. I mean, I think generally on the topic, if it's less popular, you would see the search volume declining over time. Like within the SEO tool, you should be able to see that. At a higher level for certain things, you could see potentially like Google Insights or whatever, like sort of the trend of a certain topic. But if you're talking about like a more granular long tail keyword, that tool is not going to do anything. I would say that's probably the biggest variable would just be, the trend over time in the search volume for that topic.
Cool. And then Jamie asked, how can you analyze decay when your site has been hit by an algo update?
Oh yeah, good question. I think there's a lot of nuance to that, and obviously even an algorithm update can sort of impact individual URLs differently. But I would probably want to just look at like the baseline, like overall, sort of what's the impact from the algo update. So say you lost 20% of all of your organic traffic, that can become your baseline. You're looking at call it September 2022 versus March 2022. We've lost 20%. And now on an individual URL basis, if you've lost 80% on a URL, then that may be a signal that you have decay on top of an algorithm update issue, or it's just that one was particularly hit. So I don't know that you're going to get as clear of an answer. I mean, it's similar to like what I've been through when you update pricing as a SaaS company and you're like, is this different because the price is different? Is this different because something else? Like, there's a lot of things that you're never going to fully get that clear answer, but that would be my suggestion, to sort of look at that top line drop as a baseline and then compare individuals to that baseline and see if they have declined even further than that net average.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a pretty good strategy. And then we have one more question. Mm-hmm. How long does it typically take for your content updates to impact performance?
Yeah, I touched on that. I think it can be really quick, and it should be typically for things that were getting traffic before. You should see that pretty quickly because there's already sort of that established history. There's ideally links to it, all that stuff. So I'd say if you update something and it's not moving at all, even within a couple of weeks, then like I don't think you updated it the way you needed to really recover that. So yeah, you should see it quickly, and that's where like it's a ton of fun to work with people on that and just get some of those jumps quickly. I love it as a Q4 strategy right now. Like that's just where I love that, because you're like, hey, if you haven't been doing this, like do it now, because you're just going to push all of your traffic back up and you're going to head into the new year, more traffic, more leads, all that stuff. Excuse me. And it's just a fun momentum booster, at the end of the year and heading into a new year to start out on a higher note.
Nice. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I would agree with all of that. And kind of like you briefly mentioned it when you're talking about new pieces of content you create, content you update. Like, what's the ratio you typically aim for as far as like new content generation versus content you want to update or prune, as far as like your capacity from your team?
Yeah, it's purely an opportunity thing. Because like say you're going to net gain on average 500 new visits per month from a new piece, then really you could, whatever it may be, and each topic's going to be different, and that's a sort of just a blanket statement, but like you really want to kind of understand like, okay, of these topics, if I did all new, well, what can I gain from that? And then what opportunity, how much have I lost over here? And really, it's just that balance of like, why would I spend time creating new when I have opportunity here, and it's also working against me? It's declining. And so I think a standard ratio is helpful, and whatever, if you do two new and 2 updates per month or whatever it is to start, but totally be flexible. I mean, you may have a month where you're like, we've addressed most of the decay, there's not really much opportunity to update, let's go all new, because that's where our opportunity is to keep building, expanding the net. But if you have opportunity, be willing to shift more into the decay for that.
I like that. Yeah, be flexible. Actually, just got another question from Elizabeth. How important is pillar content, and should I repair my old content first?
I think so. Generally, I think the pillar content is highly effective if you're looking at topic clusters and sort of that like topical depth and the authority. It's certainly an area to make sure you are fully covering that. And so I think the pillars are highly important. When we come into like a company that has existing content, the first thing we're looking for is like, is there a lot of the good content? It's just missing a pillar. In which case we create a pillar, connect everything that's already there, or maybe round out a little bit, and you like almost have a ready-made topic cluster. Or alternatively, like one of these pieces is close to being the topic pillar. Let's update that one to be the pillar, shift it, and then like build a little bit more around it. So I think it's not, Elizabeth, I don't think it's a matter of like choosing between one or the other. I think I would make that to some extent part of your process and looking at that. And maybe you don't have any that would be updated into that, but you can still prioritize updates to be, if you know you're going to create a pillar on X, let's look at the stuff we can update that will then fit into that topic cluster, and really prioritize that as an update potentially.
Awesome. Very helpful. Well, thanks again for a wonderful talk, Nate. Super insightful. And get right, it's attended has really enjoyed it as well. And we'll send out the recording plus all the links and a copy of Nate's slides tomorrow. But is there anything else you wanted to share, Nate, before we give everybody their time back?
No, I really appreciate you having me on, and folks on. I appreciate you spending some time with this. Like I said before, I think it's a super exciting topic. It's one that I think plagues a lot of growth for a lot of teams, and just doesn't prevents them from quite getting the results and outcomes they want. And so I love it. I would encourage you just to really embrace it and love it, and treat it as a huge growth lever for your company on an ongoing basis.
Now, before we wrap this up, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more great content from the industry's best SEOs, content marketers, and content strategists. The ClearScope webinar series happens every week and helps SEO content creators of all skill levels advance their knowledge. Hope to see you tune in next time.